I just have a couple of very brief questions to the Minister, and then I'll go to Crew and Airgrid. Minister, I'm just wondering, in relation to the review being conducted by Mr McCarthy, when do you anticipate that that will be submitted to yourself, and will you be making that publicly available? And then just secondly, in relation to the prices, you mentioned that we're seeing unprecedented increases in bills and indeed in energy poverty rates. But we're also seeing unprecedented increases in the profits for energy companies. And I know it has been spoken about a bit, but I'm just wondering, will you be implementing a windfall tax to try dampen those profits and redistribute that additional revenue back to those experiencing energy poverty? And then the question for the Crew and Airgrid, I suppose I'm trying to get... We're hearing a lot about what went wrong and who's responsible. We're seeing a bit of, backwards and forwards and finger pointing going on with that. I'm just trying to bring it back to this winter and what's going to happen for this winter. Now, in the Crew, in your opening statement, you talk about what the problem was identified in 2020, 2021. Then you refer to the programme of works as the solution. But that programme of works is actually a document that was initiated in April 21 and was published in September 21. Now, obviously, we're in a very different environment now than we were last year. So I suppose I'm surprised that you're coming in with a document outlining the solutions that's a year old to us, when we're obviously there's new issues to be considered. And similarly for Airgrid, in relation to the information you're giving us is from your energy statement, the capacity statement from last year. So I think what we need is actually real-time information as to how critical and how bad the situation is. So what I want to know is, what is the shortfall in energy between supply and demand that is forecast for this winter? Because I think this winter is what we need to be focusing on. What is the likelihood of blackouts because of that? And how are you going to make that shortfall up? So they are the questions for yourselves. Thank you.
Thanks, Deputy. First question is for Ms McAvilly, was it?
Well, I had a question for the Minister.
Okay. Go ahead, Minister.
I'll be brief in terms. We recognised in the spring that we needed to do an independent review. I approached Mr. Jennifer McCarthy, I know as former Secretary General of the Department of Government in the Department of Taoiseach, and started to work in the summer period. I expect an interim report in the autumn, and giving him great flexibility and freedom and independence in terms of how he conducts and does that. And it will be, our intention is to make it public. With regard to the introduction of windfall tax, it's one of the measures. As I said, we're looking at a variety of different options. We had a meeting with the Taoiseach, Minister of Finance, Minister of Public Expenditure yesterday. We're going to have to review all options. We have to include a review what's happening in Europe at the same time as we do that. But it is all within a part of the time frame leading up to the budget, where we're going to have to take significant measures. And as I think I said in media, I was out last Wednesday, that's one of the ones that we have to consider and look at.
Actions, Deputy, that while it was published in September of last year, it was very clearly a multi-annual programme. It's a very live programme. We have active steering groups and working groups operating at all levels throughout CRU, Airgrid and the Department, and implementing and adapting as we go on. And Jim might talk to some of the additional measures we've taken in light of this winter's challenges.
I think very briefly the programme has to adapt as risks change, as some of the mitigation measures succeed or as some of them face more significant risk. So we've seen that there has been a delay, notwithstanding the great efforts of Airgrid and ourselves and others to bring the 200 megawatts in for this winter. That's resulted in a couple of other actions being taken that are additional to the programme, including the optimisation of the batteries that we have in Ireland at the moment and the growing number of batteries we have in Ireland to provide greater service during times of stress. The second piece is to enhance demand-side response, and that's through a number of different measures, both at domestic scale and industrial scale. And another is, as Mr Foley has stated, working with the large-scale energy users who have significant quantities of backup generation in order to access that at times of system stress. So a number of different measures do change over time and must be added to as risks present themselves. Another, and it has been mentioned already, challenge that has been faced is around the retention of some of the larger, older units for the year 23-24, increased risk around that resulted in us again seeking extra temporary emergency generation for that year, notwithstanding the fact that we are still working to retain some of those units. So the programme does evolve and change over time, and we're happy to provide regular updates to the committee if the committee so desires.
And just on that then, so that's those measures, the optimisation of the batteries and demand-side management response, you're looking at that for around 200 megawatts. That's what you mentioned, the 200 megawatts at the start of your...
So what was estimated would be needed for temporary emergency generation this year would be 200 megawatts.
200.
That doesn't mean that we would stop there and try to reduce the risk.
Okay.
So we wouldn't point at that as a target. If we can decrease the risk beyond that and even further and put in further contingency measures, that is what we will attempt to do, because there's a spectrum there around risk as distinct from a single point.
Okay. So then I suppose then over to Airgrid as to whether that 200 megawatts will be sufficient to make up for the gap between supply and demand that we're going to be seeing for this winter.
So that 200 megawatts won't come on for this winter. So it'll be there in the middle part of next year, probably August, September of next year. So it won't be on for this winter. That 200 megawatts.
So those measures won't make any.
No, the other measures that Mr. Gannon refers to will, the demand-side management, the optimisation of batteries, and then the other key measures that we undertake, which we would have undertaken when we were discussing with you last year, which are the key impacts in terms of when we have shortages, when the wind doesn't blow, is the trading activities we undertake with our colleagues in Great Britain, who we would speak to every winter, right through the year, but every winter in advance of the winter to come about their planned availability, about their situation. You asked about the GCS as well as to whether it's live or relevant or not. That's produced on an annual basis, looking out 10 years out. So it would be looking at this winter. And our control centre runs 365, 24/7, looking at the issues that arise on the system. So right the way through the winter, the women and men in the control centre are there every day looking at the issue, because generators will come and go on a particular day.
I know we're very limited in time. So what is the gap for this winter between supply and demand?
Similar to last year, but slightly worse in that we'll have, if units don't come back, around 280 megawatts or so short. That will then depend on any year if a unit comes in or comes out. Units will come back before the winter, but of course there could be issues with other units as well.
So actually the demand, you don't think there's that it's not that much worse for this coming winter, is what you're saying?
Similar, slightly worse than last year, but similar, yes.
Okay, and that will be reflected, I presume, in the new supply.
It will be, yeah.
That's out.
Yeah, it will.
So we're going to be short 280 megawatts. Potentially.
Yeah,
okay.
at the start of the winter, and then depending on the availability of plant throughout the winter, which is obviously a very dynamic thing, changes throughout the winter.
For people out there,
just other members now,
it's just to try to get to the. So 280 megawatts won't really mean much to people. When you translate that into number of blackouts or number of hours of blackouts, what are we talking about?
Well, last winter we had a similar situation, and we had no loss of power at all.
But that was compensated, though. You had no.
No, last winter we had a very similar situation. This is slightly worse. We had no power loss throughout the winter. This winter we see that heightened increase because the rest of Europe is tight. And when we look for the trades from our colleagues in Britain, at times when the wind doesn't blow, because it is very wind dependent, on days when we've wind, we've no issue at all. When we don't have wind, then we will need trades with our colleagues in Britain, where our interconnection links into. If they can't provide us with those trades, then that increases the risk of an impact on end customers. But we do have a number of tools then, which Mr. Gannon would have referred to, that we utilise, including bringing on demand-side units and asking our large industrial customers to both reduce their demand and bring on their on-site generation.
So for blackouts, are we looking at high, medium, low risk this winter? Like, this is what people need to know, what businesses need to know. What are the risks of blackouts? And, you know, I'm sure some of my colleagues will be asking what measures you're bringing in and digging into that a bit more. But what is the risk this winter?
The risk is similar to last winter, and we'll undertake the measures to do it.
Which is high, medium, low?
Well, we didn't lose a megawatt last year throughout the winter.
So you think everything is fine for this winter?
No, we don't.
Okay.
We don't. No.
Well, that's what
There's
I'm
a heightened
asking.
risk, of course.
A
there
high
is.
risk,
Yeah.
okay, thank you.
Heightened.
Heightened risk is what he's saying.
Heightened risk.
Yeah,
There is.
not
absolutely.
a high risk. Thank you for that, Mr. Doyle. Thanks, Deputy Whitmore. You've got a